This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Monday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. I've looked at a whole lot of stat lines in 2021 so far, most recently 2-mana 1/3s and 3-mana 1/1s, but there's still plenty more to look at, and today we're continuing with another one, 3-mana 3/3s. I chose to look at this stat line now for kind of a goofy reason. I'm turning 33 on September 9th, so this will be my very last MTG Top 10 as a 32-year-old, so I'm not sure there will ever be a better time to look at 3-mana 3/3s, unless I live to be 333, but that seems pretty unlikely. Anyway, 3-mana 3/3s have been around for a while, but in Magic's early history, they usually had to come with downside, because that was actually a pretty impressive stat line. A good example of this is a card like Gorilla Pack, which has a text box filled with nothing but downside. Namely, it can't attack if your opponent doesn't have a forest, and if you don't have a forest, it just dies. Things have changed a lot over the years, though. 3-mana 3/3 is still a pretty nice stat line. It doesn't exactly blow you out of the water or anything, but these days we get 3-mana 3/3s with upside all the time, and adding upside to a 3-mana 3/3 tends to make it a pretty nice card. Obviously enough, to be eligible for this list, a card had to have a mana value of 3 and power and toughness equal to 3. There are 191 3-mana 3/3s in Magic, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Festa Grand Prix is worth 1 point. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Depala, Pilot Exemplar. This 3-mana 3/3 has a huge text box filled with upside. She's both a dwarf and a vehicle lord, and when she taps, you can sink mana into her to search the top of your library for a dwarf or vehicle. And the good news is, crewing vehicles involves tapping, so if you have spare mana around, that ability isn't very hard to use. She was featured in the very first set to have vehicles, Kaladesh, and there were some seriously powerful ones around, including the completely busted and quickly banned Smuggler's Copter and the merely very good Ethersphere Harvester. Depala was at the center of a variety of different vehicle decks while she was in Standard, with the Mardu version being the most successful. Those decks also tended to run other dwarves too, so that part of the card came up. Depala has yet to gain any points outside of Standard. She was of course included in Kaladesh Remastered, which gives her legality in Historic, but we're probably going to need some more impressive vehicles and or dwarves in the future before she can gain points there. At number 10, it is Sprouting Thrinax. This can be a little tricky to cast for one of each Jund mana, but in exchange for that you get something very impressive. A 3-mana 3/3 that leaves behind 3 1/1 Saproling tokens when it dies. And really, it wasn't that hard to get Jund mana going in Standard, so playing it on turn 3 was very doable. It's pretty hard for your opponent to ever come out ahead against this, and they'll usually be looking at least a 2-for-1, which is pretty nice. It gained all of its points in Standard Jund decks. At number 8, it is Banalish Marshall. It costs triple white, which is certainly pretty intense for any deck that isn't heavily into white, but if you are, it's a great 3-mana 3/3. You not only add a body to the board, you add a ton more stats to the board too, since he comes with a static Anthem effect. This means when he comes down, he immediately changes the state of the game, which will usually have an impact, even if your opponent untaps and kills the Marshall. Unsurprisingly, the Marshall gained all of its points in Standard white aggro decks. At number 7, it is Death Mist Raptor, a 3-mana 3/3 that comes with Death Touch. That's a decent baseline, but probably wouldn't be enough for a card to see a lot of play. However, the Raptor comes with Morph and some impressive Morph upside. Anytime a Morph creature is turned face up, if the Raptor's in your graveyard, it comes back to the battlefield, and you choose whether or not you want it to be face up or face down. Generally, it's better to go with face up when the creature comes back, since it's a 3/3 with Death Touch, and that's a pain to deal with in combat. The Raptor helped spawn an entire deck built around the morph mechanic called Green-White Megamorph, which was quite successful in Standard. Having a creature like the Raptor who just refuses to stay dead is a pretty good way to grind out a win, especially if you combine it with the other frightening green morph creature, Den Protector. The two of them provided the deck with serious value. Turning the Protector face up meant you got a card back from your graveyard to your hand, and any Raptors in your graveyard would return to the table. The Raptor was a pretty good inclusion even in decks that only had 1 or 2 morph creatures too, especially if the other one was Den Protector, since it had reasonable stats to begin with. So, in addition to those Megamorph decks, it was also played in Dragon Control, Devotion to Green, Collected Company, and Abzan. It doesn't have any points since rotating out of Standard, though. At number 6, it is Eldrazi Displacer. This 3-mana 3/3 can exile any creature it wants to, and when it does, they return to the battlefield tapped. This means that you can not only use the Displacer to do sweet stuff with your creatures like abuse their enter the battlefield abilities, you can also effectively use it to tap down your opponent's creatures. That's pretty powerful in a creature with solid stats. In all formats it's been in, it has been played alongside fellow Eldrazi Thought Not Seer, whose enter the battlefield ability can be abused with the Displacer. In Standard, it was also played alongside Brood Monitor, which would allow you to sacrifice infinite tokens, since you could sacrifice the Eldrazi tokens to pay for the ability of the Displacer, flicker the Monitor, and get 3 more tokens, and so on. This doesn't actually do anything on its own, but if you throw in Zulaport Cutthroat, you have an instant win combo. In Modern, it was also played alongside Thought Not Seer and Eldrazi decks that dominated the so-called Eldrazi Winter before the deck was banned out of existence. That Modern Eldrazi deck was so powerful that it was largely ported to Vintage, where Eldrazi Displacer has found some more success over the years. While the Displacer has had multi-format success, it has 0 points since 2019. However, we can't really ever count it out. It has too good of a track record for us to do that. At number 5, it is Boros Reckoner. This 3-mana 3/3 can gain first strike for a single Boros hybrid mana, but what really makes it good is the fact that when it gets dealt damage, it can damage any creature or player. This makes the Reckoner very difficult to deal with effectively in combat or with damaging removal spells, since the Reckoner will just wreck your board in the process. This leads to people being unable to block or attack into the Reckoner, which is exactly what you want. It gained all of its points in block in Standard, mostly in red aggro decks. One of the sillier things people did in that format was combine the Reckoner with Blasphemous Act, since it would usually wipe the whole board and do 13 to your opponent, which isn't usually something they'll be coming back from. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard. At number 4, it is Goblin Chainwhirler. At worst, the Whirler is a 3-mana 3/3 with first strike that does 1 damage to the opponent. That's already a card worth looking at in a lot of aggro decks. However, it usually causes even more problems than that, killing X1s and lowering the loyalty of an opposing planeswalker. Because of its somewhat tricky mana cost, the Chainwhirler was almost exclusively played in mono-red aggro decks in Standard. The Chainwhirler also has a few points in mono-red Pioneer aggro decks too, but it hasn't gained any points in 2021 so far. And at number 3, it's Mayhem Devil. If you've been playing Standard or Historic over the last couple of years, you've seen a whole lot of this 3-mana 3/3. It has a very powerful sacrifice payoff, letting you do 1 damage to anything anytime you sacrifice something. The Devil has really been important at making sacrifice decks a thing in both Standard and Historic. It has certainly helped that lots of other powerful sacrifice cards have been around. Combining the Devil with something like Woe Strider or the Cauldron Familiar plus Witch's Oven combo is downright disgusting, and the Devil just makes it so you can take your opponent to 0, sometimes out of nowhere. The Familiar actually got banned in Standard as a result of how powerful this deck was. These days, sacrifice decks are still a thing in Historic, where the Mayhem Devil has gained points as recently as the Kaldheim Championship. The Devil seems likely to continue to gain points, though perhaps not at the same clip as it has enjoyed earlier on. At number 2, I have Leopold, Emissary of Trest. Leopold was printed in a supplemental set, and as a result has only ever been legal in Legacy and Vintage, but that hasn't stopped Leopold from amassing a ton of points. This 3-mana 3/3 is all about giving you value. He makes it so your opponents can't draw extra cards, and that's a big deal in formats where something like Brainstorm is so prevalent. In addition to that, if you have Leopold in play, any removal spell your opponent casts now becomes a 2-for-1, because Leopold draws you that extra card. So he really makes sure you're going to come out ahead in terms of card advantage when he's in play. Leopold has seen pretty heavy play in both Legacy and Vintage, where he fits right into decks like Bug, which these days is sometimes just called Bug Leopold. These are aggro control decks loaded up with efficient creatures who almost always make sure you're coming out ahead with card advantage. Leopold continues to be a key card in the Eternal formats, and it will be interesting to see if it can ever pass the number 1 card on this list, which is Mantis Rider. This 3-mana 3/3 doesn't do anything super fancy. It's just a French vanilla creature. Of course, it's a French vanilla creature with 3 keyword abilities, which is kind of satisfying on a list of 3-mana 3/3s. Anyway, the Rider gives you an evasive creature that puts your opponent on a quick clock, while it can also hang back and protect you if necessary, thanks to Vigilance. While in Standard, it was played in Jeskai midrange and aggro decks, but has found even more success in Modern, where it's been played in humans. Mantis Rider has seen a ton of play there, since the deck has excellent mana and lots of human payoffs, and that makes Mantis Rider a great fit. It will continue to gain points in Modern in the future, and it has a sizable lead, so I don't see the top spot on this list changing anytime soon. Leopold is the only card on the list that might threaten the Rider's spot on top of it. Well, those are the 10 3-mana 3/3s that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these creatures, check out the description, where you'll find a direct Card Kingdom link for every card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on old MTG top 10s, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly, including one for more videos about creature stat lines. Thanks for watching.